When you think about the highest level of international law, you probably imagine total consensus, right? Clear, final answers. But what happens when the most respected judges on the planet just can't agree? Today, we're going to dive into a case that literally split the International Court of Justice. It's a fascinating look at the human story that can hide behind all the legal jargon. So let's go back to the day the verdict came down and see how this all played out. Okay, picture this. It's July 20th, 1982. We're at the Peace Palace in The Hague. The International Court of Justice, we're talking the top judicial body of the UN, is about to deliver its official legal opinion on what seems like a pretty simple case. But the final vote? Oh, it was anything but simple. That was it. 10-5. That was the final count on the biggest question in front of the court. Now, yeah, it's a majority for sure, but it's also a serious split. A full third of the judges looked at the evidence and came to the completely opposite conclusion. It just makes you wonder. 10-5 on what exactly? And here's your answer. The court's majority decided that a lower body, the UN's Administrative Tribunal, had not made a mistake in how it ruled. Basically, most of the top judges said, yep, the lower court followed the rules just fine. But wait, if that's the case, why on earth was there so much disagreement? And that, right there, is the core of what we're digging into today. That one, divided vote, tells a much, much bigger story. It's a story about rules, about rights, and about a last-minute scramble that almost threw the whole case off the rails. To really get it, we've got to meet the man at the center of it all. So the case was technically Mortischt versus the Secretary General, but this wasn't some huge geopolitical dispute. Nope. This was about one guy, a UN staff member named Mr. Mortischt, and a payment he was pretty sure he was owed after he finished his job. And that payment was something called a repatriation grant. It's actually a really simple idea. It's just some money the UN gives an employee to help them move back home, or somewhere else, once their contract is up. For Mr. Mortischt, this wasn't some abstract legal idea. This was about the benefits he had earned. Okay, so here's where the fight really starts. On one side, you have the Administrative Tribunal. They looked at the rules that were in place when Mr. Mortischt left his job and said, absolutely, he gets the grant. But on the other side, the UN General Assembly had just passed a new rule that said you had to show proof you'd actually moved before you could get the money. And that created this huge legal question. Can you change the rules in the middle of the game and apply them to something that's already happened? Now, a case like this doesn't just show up at the ICJ out of thin air. Like pretty much everything in international law, it follows a very long, very official paper trail. And we're going to follow that trail, because how it all went down is actually a huge part of the story. So, at first, everything looked totally normal. In July of 1981, a UN committee decides, hey, let's ask the world's top court what they think. The request gets filed, and a few weeks later, the court president sets a very clear deadline for everyone to submit their arguments: October 30th. It all seems perfectly straightforward, right? And what's really amazing is we can actually see the documents from the time. This right here is a letter from August 4th, 1981. It's the court registrar formally saying, okay, we've received the case. You can see the official stamps and letterhead. I mean, this is the machinery of global justice, right here on paper. And this next document, this one has the detail that would cause all the trouble. It's a telex, sent just 2 days later, and it spells out the deadline in black and white, fixing 30 October 1981 as time limit for filing written statements. Couldn't be clearer. A firm date was set. Or so everyone thought. Because this is where our little administrative case gets a huge dose of drama. A simple, almost unbelievable breakdown in communication turned this whole orderly process into a frantic race against the clock for Mr. Mortischt's legal team. So here's the kicker. That telex from early August, the one with the all-important deadline, well, somehow the news never actually reached Mr. Mortischt's lawyer. For over a month, his team was completely in the dark, thinking they had all the time in the world while the clock was secretly ticking down. And you can almost feel the stress in this first letter from his lawyer, Sylvanus Tyrwell. He's writing in late September, basically saying, hey, we literally just found out about this deadline. He politely asks for an extension, just in his words, to compensate for the time lost. Seems pretty reasonable. But then his tone totally shifts. In another letter, Tyrwell is way more direct. You can tell he's frustrated. He makes it a point to say that the delay was because of a failure of communication on your part. He's making it crystal clear for the record. Hey, we weren't dragging our feet. The system failed us. Well, in the end, fighting for his client paid off. The court agreed and granted the extension. The new deadline was pushed back a month to November 30th. The crisis was over, and finally, both sides could get back to preparing their actual arguments.
And that brings us right back to where we started, that courtroom in July 1982. Now that we know about the crazy backstory and the race to meet the deadline, we can finally make sense of the court's really divided final opinion.
So this is what it all boiled down to. The chart shows the final votes. On that main legal question, it was 10-5. There was another question about whether the tribunal overstepped its authority, and that was a little more one-sided at 12-3. But on the central issue, the one that really mattered, a full third of the judges dissented. So what did the 10-5 vote actually mean? Well, it meant that the ICJ decided the General Assembly's new rule was the one that mattered. So even though the lower tribunal had correctly applied the old rules, the High Court's opinion was that the new rule, the one requiring proof of moving, was now the law of the land. And for Mr. Mordashid, that meant he lost his case. But those dissenting voices were really powerful. 4 of the judges, Laks, Morozov, Elkhani, and Schwebel, felt so strongly about it that they wrote their own separate opinions, explaining why they thought the majority was wrong. They put their disagreement into the official record, which just shows you how deep the divide on this really was. And that just leaves us with this one last big question. This whole case proves that justice isn't always as simple as just applying a rule. It's about deciding which rule applies. And when that rule changes halfway through, who should win? The person who had rights under the old system or the institution that gets to write the new rules? The 10-5 split here shows there's no easy answer. It kind of makes you realize that even at the very top, the law isn't always set in stone. It's a constant, very human argument about how to read the map.